dear. Well, that's not going to work, is it? Just turn that up to see if that's working all right. Yes, it is. Okay. Seems to be all go. Good evening, people. Well, I was going to wear this fantastic crown on my head. Don't know if that's going to work, though. Oh, we'll go like this. Anyway, hopefully that's in a good position there. And hopefully you can all hear me. Good evening and welcome to this podcast. This is one of the first podcasts that I'm doing through my Jivana Quantum World YouTube video. So welcome everybody and thank you for joining in. If you watch this now or later, appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to my channel, like, share, and comment. Trying to get up to over 50 subscribers, so which means that I can do lives from my phone, which might make it a little bit easier, although this is quite a good setup. Anyway, now I thought since it's the coronation and all, I've just been watching the coronation concert. I think it's been a bit delayed here on in New Zealand, but this is, I'll just show that to you. There we go. It's round the wrong way, of course, but it's called Lindisfarne Mead. Lindisfarne Mead is produced on the holy island of Lindisfarne, situated off the Northumberland coast. This island is the cradle of Christianity in England, for in the year 634 AD, Oswald, King of Northumberland, brought St. Aidan from the island to establish a monastery here. The abbey is now in ruins, yet much of the original beautiful Norman arches and pillars are preserved, and the brew house, which was used by the monks and can still be seen. The honey which is used in the production of Lindisfarne Mead is drawn from the four corners of the world, and here on the island, which is vetted with fermented grape juice and the pure natural water of an artisan well, and fortified with the fine spirits to produce Lindisfarne Mead. So here we go. This has been sitting around. It's a kind of family heirloom that I kind of inherited from my father when he passed away. And he was very much a supporter of the royal family. We used to religiously watch the Queen's speech when I was a child. Personally, myself, I wasn't too interested in it, but it was something that we grew up with as a family, watching the Queen's speech every year. So, it is really tasty. It's a bit like sherry or port, but fortified wine. Like it's kind of it's got a very sweet honey, fruity flavour as well. Very nice. So nice. Yeah. I might have a drink of water after that as well, just to keep my fluids up. So welcome, and thank you for coming along. So today we're going to be talking about the numerology and Vedic astrology of the new king, King Charles III. Very excited to be doing this. I've had 3 attempts at this. The last attempt actually cut off halfway through, and then it carried on, but then it deleted to the second half of it, which was a bit of a pain, so I'm starting again. This may go on for a while. It's likely to be quite an in-depth topic. I don't like to do things in halves, and one of the things about Vedic astrology is, I hope that is loud enough. I'm just going to maybe turn it up slightly because it seems to be quite low here on this speaker. But I hope that it is loud enough for you. No, it's in this one actually. Right. Hope that is. Hope you can hear that. All right. It seemed to work last time, so actually I can just check it on my phone just to make sure that it is coming through. So let's have a look. Just go to my page there. Back. Counts to quantum world. Here we go. Right. Just checking that this is working. Just checking that this is working. Yes, it obviously is, because I just heard it there coming through my phone. So that's good. Just move this pop-up shield. Sorry, this is the first time I've used this microphone in a podcast, so it's very exciting. Anyway, the Vedic astrology and numerology of King Charles III. Just so you know, you can get your Vedic astrology and numerology charts done through me, through my Jivana Quantum Healing and Jivana Quantum Healing and Holistic Consultation sites on Facebook, and I've also got a web page. They're listed below. I've also got an Instagram site that you can contact me through. So if you're interested in getting that done, I can do also packages where I just do a consultation. It does take a long time to draw up a Vedic astrology chart, usually about 5 hours to look at the whole thing, and then another 5 hours to read it all through. So it's can be quite involved in depth, but I'm just going to sort of skim the surfaces here, not go into every detail. But my interest really is where Vedic astrology and numerology actually cross over, and there's a difference obviously between Vedic astrology and Western astrology, and a very important difference which I'll talk about later. But I find that with the work I do doing the Vedic astrology charts and numerology charts, I find there is an awful lot of crossover between the two. They're just different ways of looking at the same thing. So I hope you'll find it interesting. All right, so to start off with, King Charles was born on the 14th of November at 9:14 p.m. In London, the 14th of November 1948 at 9:14 p.m. So looking at those numbers, so in numerology, there's a number of different aspects to numerology which make up somebody's chart. So first of all, we're going to look at what's called the heart's desire number, which is to do with the day you were born on. So he was born on the 14th of November. So 14th has the 1, the 4, but it also has the 5 energy. So you say that the heart's desire number is a 5, and that is the number of change. It's the number of freedom. It's the number of movement. It's the number that sits in the middle of the number spectrum from 1 to 9. So it has aspects of both masculine and feminine. It's kind of a number about balance, particularly though about freedom as well. But being his heart's desire number, that means his heart's desire is for freedom, for change, and for movement. So if you see 555 as an angel number, it often means that you have big changes coming. So number 5 is the number for change, freedom, and movement, essentially. Now, with King Charles, so often people who have the number 5 as their heart's desire number, or potentially their life path number as well, which I'm a number 5 life path number myself, it often means that they have grown up with restriction in their lives and in their upbringing, and are wanting to break out of that, hence their desire for freedom. So that's part of their path. In tarot, the 5 is the Hierophant, so it's like religious tradition and all of that kind of the restrictive influence sometimes of that in your life, and wanting to break free from that. So one of the pitfalls of the life path number 5 is that they can sort of get to be a bit hedonistic at times, and yeah, they also don't tend to be 9 to 5ers. But with regards to Charles, it's not his life path number, it's his heart's desire number. So you can see with him that he grew up with the restrictions of being a future king on him. He was a prince, part of the royal family, and so his part of his nature is to rebel against that sort of restriction that he grew up with. Number 5 is sometimes a bit of a rebellious number, but it's not necessarily rebellious in the sense of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Always, it can be just rebelling against whatever sort of restrictions that have been placed on you. So, for example, if it's a change maker, essentially. So if for example, your parents were alcoholics and you were a 5, then it might be your in your nature to rebel against the kind of conditioning that you had grown up with and become a teetotaler, for example. So it might be happen that way round. So, but the number 5 is like I say, a number about movement, freedom, and change. So it's someone who desires change and movement, and we can already see that in a sense in Charles, that he's wanting to dispense with a lot of the, not necessarily a lot of them, but at least some of the ancient old traditions. Like I heard for his coronation ceremony, he was talking about getting rid of the garters or the stockings. That is a traditional part of the coronation wear, and the coronation ceremony was very modern in a lot of ways. 5 is quite inclusive also, because it sits in the middle of all the numbers, and so it's a bit of everything in a sense. Yeah. So yeah. So in essence, Charles, as his heart's desire, wants to bring change in his leadership as a king. Now, with the number 14, which is the number 1 and the number 4, you get another aspect. So the number 1 is someone who desires to be a leader, and as a heart's desire number. So 1 is the number of the leader, or they're often sort of quite dominant characters, leaders, people who are paving new paths, quite independent, sometimes a little bit lonely, because sometimes being a leader is lonely. Now, the 4 is the number of the hard-working, disciplined, very practical, organized person, no-nonsense kind of person. And the 4 is also the number of Earth. So, in a sense, combining those numbers together, Charles wants to be a leader, a hard-working, disciplined leader with a connection to the Earth. So we see a lot of the environmental leadership that he brings to the table. He's made a lot of changes in that. He's very interested in being a change maker for the environment. So we've got 5 being change. So he wants to, his heart's desire is to bring change, being a leader for a hard-working, disciplined leader for and practical for the Earth or the environment as such. So we see a lot of those aspects in Charles. He's got a real concern for the environment and climate change and all those kind of things, aspects. So yeah, that's his heart's desire number. So moving on, we'll move into next his life path number. And if you get the life path number by adding the all the numbers in the birth date together. So with Charles, we've got the 14th, so you add 1 plus 4, which is 5, as we said. Then we got the 11, so you add 1 plus 1 is 2, 7. And then you got 1948, so 19 adds up to 10, 17, and 48 adds up to 12, 29. 29 simplifies down to 11. Now, this is one way of looking at numerology. There are different ways. Some of them would simplify the year date down to 1 number and the day date down to 1 number, but keep the master number of 11 in the middle. And that would be a different way of looking at it. This is the one I do is using the Dan Millman method. And so it's just a case of adding up all the numbers in the birth date. So it adds up to 29, and that simplifies down to 11. 11 being a master number. Generally, you don't simplify the master numbers down. So making him an 11, a 29, 11 in numerology. But it also has the element of the 2. When you add 1 and 1 together, it makes 2. So the 11 has that aspect as well. Now, 11 is a master number. So master numbers are considered to be numbers that vibrate a little higher. So high vibrational numbers. So number 1 in the 11 means, again, that he's a leader as such. But the number 11 is actually a very intuitive number. It's even said that number 11s might have psychic abilities or channeling abilities, might make good poets, for example. They're very sensitive. It's also said of 11s that they often don't fit in as children and feel like they're from a different planet. And so they may have a very slow, plodding approach to coming into their own as such. And we see that with Charles. He doesn't sort of get to be his full expression until his late 70s in a sense. So it's a kind of very slow methodical approach, where also bringing that element of intuition and sensitivity, which I think you can see in him as a child, particularly if you watch a series like The Crown. It's quite reflective of that, and also that he didn't really fit in at school sometimes, and yeah, so, and also he didn't really necessarily fit in to the royal family. He felt a bit like a sort of fish out of water. So yeah, there's that aspect of the 11. I too have 11 in my numerology, not as my life path. But, so yeah, 11 also tends to be a, like I said, it's a high vibrational number. So sometimes it gives the sense of feeling like you're from another planet, and that, but you might not even be aware. So 11s tend to be, when they walk into a room, there's an element of magnetism about an 11, but they might be quite unconscious of it and unaware of it themselves, that they have this kind of vibration that's sort of bringing people towards them. 11 also has the aspect of the 2 in it. So the 2 represents relationship and partnership, and it also represents polarity and duality. So a 2 has a desire to be in a relationship from quite early on. They are seeking partnership, they're seeking relationship, they're seeking connection. And sometimes that can be to their detriment, where they will get into relationships for the sake of being in relationships, or in the 11's case, where perhaps they've been, the thing about the 11 is it's a very sensitive, intuitive number, but sometimes in this kind of world that we're living in, the 11s will get, can get pushed around a little bit. So if they're in a sort of environment where a lot of people are, throwing in their voice and saying, you should do this, you should do that, you should do this, then they're quite empathic. So they pick up on that energy, and sometimes they lose a sense of self because of listening to all these voices that are around them, thinking that they've got to do the right thing as such. And so the number 2, for example, like I say, can get into relationships early on just for the sake of being in a relationship, which isn't necessarily the right reason for being in a relationship. And so it's a lesson that sometimes they need to learn in early relationships. And we see that with Charles in his relationship with Diana. And one of the things with Diana is her heart's desire is a 1, which is to lead. She's also a 7, which is a sort of introspective, logical spirituality. It's a spiritual number. But in some sense, her personality might be quite dominant and overpowered Charles. And in some sense, there was a sense where she had this kind of allure and magnetism to the public, where she'd go on tour and all the attention went on her because of her beauty and her magnetism and her charm, and so it got distracted away from Charles, and Charles sort of felt a bit bitter at times, I think, because he wasn't because Diana was getting a bit more of the attention than he was. So there's a sense where a two can sometimes lose themselves in a relationship. And we'll get onto this further in the Vedic astrology, because it's very interesting in terms of that as well, his Vedic astrology. So, yeah, so the number 11. One of the things I talked about the number 11 was actually the intuitive aspect, and it's quite a spiritual number, how they're seen as sort of sometimes as psychics or mediums, or channels. So that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone who has an 11 in their chart is going to be that, but it means that that ability is there, and sometimes they might use it in different ways. For example, artists are said in some ways to be channeling, so writers, for example, or painters, or that's a form of channeling in a sense. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a medium or something like that. You might be channeling your writing or your artwork, but one of the things that sort of sticks out to me is how Charles was known for talking to plants, and people thought that was a bit goofy back in the day, but actually there's a lot of scientific evidence to suggest that talking to plants is actually very good. If you have heard, there was a experiment I heard of once done by some monks where they meditated or sent energy to one garden, and the other monks weeded the other garden, but they didn't weed the one where they sent energy and meditated. And apparently the one that they meditated sent energy to actually did just as well, if not better, than the garden that was being weeded. So it's an interesting notion, but also I don't know if some of you might have read the book The Chaldean Prophecy. There's a lot of talk there about sending energy to plants. Certainly people who do energy healing like Reiki or any other form of healing are probably quite aware that you can send energy to plants. There's the experiments of Dr. Masaru Emoto, who did experiments on water crystals, and he put water in jars and put the words "thank you" and "I love you," and he put hate and other words on, sort of negative vibrational words on other bottles, and then photographed the water crystals, and the ones that had love and thank you came out with these beautiful mandalas, whereas the ones with hate, and I think he did one with actually Hitler on, came out very contorted and twisted. I know there's been people that have sort of tried to debunk that work, but I don't know. I sort of feel that there might be an agenda operating there. I had a friend who actually did one of those experiments on rice, where she got her children to say "I love you" and put all their positive energy into one carton of rice as they came into the classroom each day, and onto the other one she got them to say "I hate you," and sort of put all their negative energy into it. That's right, as they entered the classroom, they had to put all their negative energy into the rice, and as they left the classroom, they had to put all their positive energy into the rice at the end of the day, or something like that. So at the end of 1 week, the rice that had the positive energy put into it was pretty much edible, was the other rice, and it was in very good condition, like it's almost like it was just as new, whereas the rice that had had the hate put into it was all moldy and deteriorated and disgusting and kind of looked very inedible. So that's just one experiment there with rice. So in numerology, there's also a name number, and there's different ways of calculating the name number. One of them is Chaldean numerology. There's also Pythagorean numerology. I've also heard of other methods called Tibetan and Tibetan numerology, but that might be more to do with the interpretations. I believe there's a Chinese numerology as well. There's certainly a other type that I was thinking of as well. Anyway, we're going to use the Chaldean, which is the Hebrew numerology, which I think is older than the Pythagorean. The Pythagorean numerology assigns basically A1, B2, C3, D4 up to 9, and then starts again. Whereas the Chaldean one, I think has different assignations depending on the letters, going back to the Hebrew alphabet, I believe. So yeah, we're using the Chaldean ones just because I feel it's got more of a history behind it. And if you add up Prince Charles's name, so he's got quite a big name. His full name is Charles Philip with one L. I thought it had two L's, and so if you have watched my Instagram video, it's actually, the numerology is going to be slightly different here. It has two L's, or one L in it only. Charles Philip Arthur George Mountbatten Windsor. So his surname is a hyphened name. Mountbatten Windsor. Charles Philip Arthur George Mountbatten Windsor. It's a bit of a mouthful, but if you add them all together, there's a lot of numbers there. Go to the Chaldean numerology calculator. You can find those online. And you come up with the number 168. And 1 plus 6 plus 8 adds up to 15. Got that 1 and that 5 there again. And that adds up to 6. 1 plus 5 is 6. So 6 is the number of harmony. And it represents, it's quite a sort of, it's like you look at the shape of the 6, it looks kind of like a pregnant mother. And means someone pregnant with possibilities. It's also a very nurturing, caring number. Jacinda Ardern, incidentally, is a number 33 in numerology, another master number, which has the 6 vibration as well. And there's a lot of aspects of her that you can notice in the number 6. So yeah, it's a one of the shadow sides of the 6, though, is the 6s tend to want they want to give their energy, they want to help people and heal people, and sometimes as a result they can get worn down because people come to them and they want to give and give and give and give and give, to the point where they don't really sometimes lose sense of looking after themselves, and they can get run down and overexerted. And as a result, when they're exhausted, they can go into the shadow side, and the shadow side of the 6 is where they become the controlling mother, where the 6 becomes a kind of overarching protective figure, protecting the child. So yeah, and we see elements of that, I think, in Charles, where for his children, perhaps, where there's an element of sort of control, where he wants to sort of keep them out of harm's way, and sometimes that can be to the detriment. In Jacinda Ardern, we saw it in the lockdowns that she imposed on people, almost to the point where sixes are kind of have this, sometimes they can care just a little bit too much to the point where it's smothering, and maybe her intentions were good and that she wanted to keep COVID out of, you know, the country, but it was inevitable that it was going to sort of move through the country, and so she cared so much that it became almost like a protective mother who won't let her kids out of the house kind of thing, lest something bad happened to them, and so they never sort of get to live in a sense. So that's when she locked down the country over one case of COVID, for example. So yeah, that's an element of the sixes. They can become a bit controlling, and when they're exhausted, or in their shadow side when they're kind of generally when they're tired. The other aspect of the six is they can also be quite aloof if in the shadow side, where they might get to a point where they're kind of up in the ivory tower looking down on the people below, and they don't want to kind of go out and meet the people and be with the people. So that's when they get into the shadow side, and we saw that again in Jacinda, where she was in the in Parliament and didn't want to go out and meet with the protesters. Incidentally, David Seymour is a 33, Trevor Mallard is a 33, and they all exhibited the same behaviour. They didn't want to go out and meet with the people. Now, that's an element that possibly could be in Charles. Generally, we've seen him out there with the people quite a lot, but sometimes he does like to sort of retreat, I think, into the plants and the flowers and the castle, and not really want to have anything to do with the masses out there. He needs that time, and that's part of finding balance as well, the balance between being a public figure and also needing time to yourself and time to sort of re-energize, really. 6 is a number that nature, being in nature, is very good for the 6 in terms of re-energizing. 6 is also the number of harmony, so it's also a lot to do with music. So you see a lot of musicians with 6 in their charts, and it's apparently Charles plays the piano and the cello, and obviously he's having a big concert for his coronation, so there's a love of the arts there, and a love, and also the 5 is a number that is associated also with acting as well, so he did a little bit of that when he was young as well. Now, within the name, we also have what's called the soul urge number, and we have the personality number too. So the soul urge number, if you think of a vase, the kind of essence, the space inside the vase is what you would, it's like the vowel. So the vowels make up the space inside the vase. It's like the essence, or the feeling behind it, and then the consonants shape a word. So they bring the shape of the vase, and that's the personality. So the vowels are like this is the same in theatre as well. The vowels are sort of like the essence, or carry the emotion of the word, whereas the consonants provide the sort of shape of the word, or the personality. So the soul urge number of Charles, I think, was it was 59. So and 5 and 9 is 14 again. So we've got the again, leader for environment. He was also born at 9:14 p.m. So we've got 14 coming up quite a bit. Leader for the earth, for change, for the environment. Sorry, in the going back to the destiny number, which is his full name, you got 1 and 5 being a leader for change as well, a leader for movement and change. So I'm expecting Charles to make a lot of changes very quickly while he's got the chance. I think that's one of the things he desires, is to bring change, particularly in the realms of science and environmental areas and the earth, that kind of area. Now, so 14 adding up to a 5, so 5 being, again, his soul urge is to bring change. His soul urge is for freedom. His soul urge is for movement. His soul urge is a bit of a rebel. The 5 has a rebellious streak. They don't like to fit into society's norms. They don't like to be told what to do. So he has this urge. It's the same as his heart's desire number, for freedom, for change, for movement. Okay. Yeah, the other thing about the 5 is it tends to be a bit androgynous as well. So there's the masculine and the feminine aspect to it. It's right in the middle from 1 to 9 as well. It's like I said, it's a number of balance. So there's a bit of androgyny there in the 5. They tend to be quite good actors and quite good salesmen, but the heart urge there, with the soul urge, it's more of a desire for freedom, of change, for movement. And then if we go to the personality number, so the personality number would be 59, would be 109. No? Yes, it would be 109. So that would add up to 1 again, leader. 109, yeah. So, yeah, so 109 would add up to 1, which means he's a leader. The 9 is a kind of Marsian number, so it means someone who's quite holistic in nature. They can get a little bit impatient when angered. They're quite driven. So you've got the 1, the 0, and the 9. So a leader, and that adds up to 1, which can mean quite a lonely figure as a personality. He's can be seen as quite a lonely figure, independent, brave, can be a bit unpopular because he wants to forge new paths, and that means sometimes going against the establishment. So it means breaking new ground, breaking new territory. It means they're ahead of the curve. We've got that in the 11 too. So they're kind of forging new paths. And in order to forge new paths, you have to break away from the mold of the general populace. So you have to be unpopular for a while you're experimenting with new things. And yeah, that's part of the loneliness of being a leader in a sense. So yeah, there's a lot there in his numerology. Yeah. So the 5 and the 1 again add up to the 6. So that would be the total there, which is his destiny number, as I was saying. Excuse me, a little bit tired, but yeah, we're gonna plug on and now take a look at his Vedic astrology. So the Vedic astrology is different in a sense from Western astrology. And I have studied astrology for a number of years, and I prefer the Vedic astrology system, having looked at both over a long period of time and noticed the differences. So I started out in looking at Western astrology, and the reason I prefer Vedic astrology is when I looked at my Western chart and my Vedic chart side by side, I found that with the Western one, I found things that some of it seemed quite right and somewhat accurate, and then there are other things that just seemed way off. There was a mixture, whereas in the Vedic one, I found that generally everything resonated to some degree, and there were things that were just like really pinpoint accurate. So that's the difference that I found between them. When you think of what Vedic astrology, there's a difference between, so one of them is called the sidereal approach. So the Vedic astrology is sidereal, whereas the Western one is the tropical approach. If you look at Western astrology, you'll notice that all the sun signs are fixed. So, for example, I'm not sure of the exact dates, but it's something like the 21st to the 22nd, or the 22nd, it's different with each month. But from, say, the 22nd of October, the 22nd of November, that means you're a Scorpio. The thing about that is that it doesn't really take into account the leap year in a sense. So you got to remember that we have 365 and a quarter days in a year, and every 4 years we have a leap year. So where does that leap year go in Western astrology? Well, it goes into Pisces each time. Every time there's a leap year, it gets slotted into the Pisces, and the signs remain fixed. So whereas if you look at Vedic astrology, the Vedic astrology system moves each year. So it means that you have to actually know your birth time, because it switches over at a particular time, and each year it switches over at a slightly different time, because it takes into account that quarter of a year each year. So it's subtly moving all the way along. And the thing about that is, I saw this diagram of the solar system where the sun is actually moving through the solar system with all the planets moving around it like this. Whereas if you assume the older version that we used to get as kids was that the sun was fixed and the planets just move around the sun. But actually, it's not like that. The sun is moving through the solar system. That's where we get things like the long count. So we have the age of Aquarius, for example, because you talk about the Mayan calendar, and there's a 25 or 26,000 year cycle of about 20. So you divide that into the zodiac, and there's 12 cycles of 2,000 years, and we're moving into the age of Aquarius. We came out of the age of Pisces. Jesus was meant to be the avatar of the Piscean age, being someone, the fishes being a sign of Jesus and the Piscean age. So yeah, in a sense, what I'm trying to say is, and the other thing is, when NASA did a plotting of the constellations recently, and I noticed that when they plotted the constellations, my NASA constellation horoscope was the same as my Vedic horoscope. Now NASA actually plotted them and divided them into 13 stars and added a new 13 constellations. They added a new one called something like Asclepius, I think it was. And they shortened some of them and lengthened others due to the fact that some constellations are bigger than others, so the sun moves through them at different periods. But ultimately, what NASA then did is say, these are the new constellations and these are the dates, and if you, in another 60 years, there'll be another month out. So essentially they went and used the Western model and fixed them again, and when the Vedic model is constantly moving, and so it adjusts with the times, and hence why I find it to be a more accurate marker. And generally, if you're, but the thing about the Western one is a certain amount of people will have the same Western sun sign as their Vedic one, and probably many of their planets would be the same as the Vedic one. That's people who are towards the end of their sign generally. So there's about probably 15% of people whose Vedic Western signs would be in line with the Vedic ones. And if you think about that, there's probably about 15% of people who actually probably believe in astrology, maybe. But maybe if people had a look at their Vedic signs, this is just me championing Vedic signs, and I know that having a look at you have to really look at your whole chart as well. So in the Western one, for example, you might be a Scorpio and you might relate to a lot of aspects of Scorpio, but you might find that actually in the Vedic one, your Mercury or your Mars might be in Scorpio anyway, so maybe that's what you're seeing there. Although people can argue both ways, and I no disrespect to people who like the Western astrology system, but I've just found, for me personally, I tend to resonate more with the Vedic system and its approach. The Vedic system actually has things called nakshatras, which is phases of the moon. I'm not going to go so much into those. I'm going to use a kind of mixture of East and West, using the Eastern Vedic positions, because that's what I think is really important in the Vedic signs. So I do birth charts for people, so if you enjoy what I come up with here, you're welcome to contact me for a consultation, should I say. So let's have a look at Charles' Vedic horoscope. So Charles was born on the 14th of November, as I said, at 1948 at 9:14 p.m. So I like to use this site Procorala, which I've found to be a very good site. And through that, we're going to run through Charles's birth chart. So to start off with, in the Vedic sign, in the Western sign, Charles would be a Scorpio. In the Vedic signs, however, Charles is a Libra. Okay, I'm the same. My birthday is quite close to Charles. In fact, My birthday's on the 15th of November, so in Auckland, and I was born in the morning. So you could say that Charles and me were born within an hour of each other, but obviously he was born many, many years before me. But there's elements of both our numerology chart and our astrology chart that are quite similar. So Charles is, for example, I've got the number 5 in my numerology chart. I've got the number 11 in my numerology chart. I've got the number 6 in my numerology chart as well. So anyway, as I was saying, Sun for Charles is in Libra. Also in Libra is Mercury, the planet of communication. Okay, and we also have in Libra Ketu, which is the south node of the moon. Now, Ketu and Mercury are in conjunction, meaning they are very close together, and the sun is a bit further out. So, yeah, that will emphasize the aspects of Ketu and Mercury. So Libra is considered to be the scales, so they're often considered to be quite diplomatic, is one thing. Librans are also considered to be very idealistic, is another thing. Librans are said to have quite an overexpansive ego, to the point where their identity sometimes is not very well formed. Librans like to give, and so they like to be of service to others. They think about others first, so much so that they can forget about themselves and lose themselves thinking about others and trying to help others and trying to do things for others all the time and forget about themselves. The opposite of Libra, of course, is Aries, where they have a very defined personality. Aries is the first house, and it's the sign of the personality or the ego, in a sense. And the Aries are very driven, and that one criticism of Aries is that they might be a bit tend to be self-centered or focused on themselves. Whereas Libra is the opposite. They tend to be overgivers to the point where they lose themselves by being so focused on others. But that's one of the problems with the Libra, is that they've got this overexpansive ego where they tend to like variety, and they tend to not like having favorites, and they tend to want to be a bit of a people pleaser. They want to please everybody, and they want to bring harmony and peace to everything. They want everything to be nice. They don't like conflict generally. So it gets to the point, and this is an element of the 6 too, although 6 has a lot of Cancerian elements as well. But the Librans, want peace, and they don't want conflict, and so they want to please everybody, which, in a sense, by trying to please everybody, ultimately you can end up pleasing nobody. And so one of the aspects also of a Libra is, because they don't like to have favorites, they kind of want to try everything, and in a sense that means that it makes it very hard for them to make a decision, because they can see all sides of everything, and that makes them also very holistic. And Prince Charles, or King Charles, should I say, has a very holistic view of things. I would say he's explored many different topics. Another aspect of the Libra is they tend to be very artistic as well. They tend to be involved in the creative arts and the healing arts as well. So that's one of the aspects of Libra. So Libras also tend to be interested in fashion, but he's not a Venus in Libra, which is a sign to do with career. Charles' sun is in the, let me see, Ascendant. So his sun would be in the 4th house, which is the house of Cancer as well. So that means that the area of the family, in a sense. So that's his sun sign is in Libra, in the house of the family. So this is where he brings these Libran aspects to bear. Also, that's where his Mercury is and his Ketu is, all sort of clustered together in that house of Cancer, which is the house of family. And so Mercury, the other thing about Libras is they tend to be very charming, and so they often speak with a soft-spoken voice. So he's got his Mercury in Libra, which means that he might be quite indecisive in the way that he communicates, but he also wants to please people, and he might have, one of the things that it talks about actually is that he might have some emotional trauma as a child where he wasn't allowed to express his emotions and was told off for expressing his emotions to its full extent, to the point where he tends to intellectualize emotions. And so in the sense of speaking, someone with that Libra in Mercury might tend to speak with quite a monotone, in a sense, because their voice has become a bit dispassionate, because they have been told that emotions are not really something that you bring out in public, in a sense. Actually, what I want to do is run through the Rahu and Ketu of Charles, because this is really interesting. Rahu in Libra. So it's Ketu in Libra. Actually, Ketu in Libra. So Ketu and Rahu are the north and south nodes of the moon. So Rahu's the north node, Ketu's the south node. They had to do with the Ketu is to do with what the challenges that you're bringing into this lifetime that you need to, that you kind of brought out in early life, and that you're overcoming and moving away from. And later in life you move into your Rahu, which is the North Star, or where you're moving to, and that's how you overcome the challenges that you brought in, and they're at opposite ends of the spectrum. So if your Ketu's in Libra like Charles, then your Rahu is in Aries. So this sign, sacred astrology, is very good for this. So it's what you bring in from previous incarnations into this lifetime as kind of challenges to overcome, in a sense. And then your Rahu, like I say, is your North Star, your guiding force, your direction. So I'll just read some of this. Rahu in Aries enables the person, Charles, to undertake daring deeds with every chance of success, and he should not hesitate to go forward, fortune favours him. This position indicates a rashness that is profitable. It is also lucky for love, but after much torment on this account. Now we saw that with Diana and Camilla. He's lucky in love with Camilla. He was lucky in love with Diana as well, but there was much torment early on. And that's the aspect of the two that we saw before as well. In a critical situation, Rahu in Aries helps the native, or Charles, don't like that word, the native, helps Charles to extricate himself from trouble. It is similar to the square in an unfortunate hand as the antidote to misfortune. So, in a sense, that's rather nasty way of looking at it, but when Diana died, and there's a lot of views on how that happened. I'm not going to go into that in this podcast, but that is an element of this where there's an unfortunate hand that it allowed him to extricate himself from that troublesome aspect to a sense, in a sense. Not that he was still in that relationship at that time, but it sort of did enable him to get freedom from that, the difficulty of that relationship in a sense, through in a critical situation, through misfortune, he's able to extricate himself from trouble. Ketu in Libra prophesies lawsuits connected with material questions. It also means disputes in the home and danger of separation. Well, we saw him separate again from Diana. It is not a good position for the spiritual evolution of the native, as it makes him practical, often too practical, which may lead to trouble with the law or those with whom he comes into contact. This position, especially in the 5th house, which it's not, shows an anxiety on account of a child. And I think Charles was quite anxious growing up. Nevertheless, Ketu is in the third, if Ketu is in the 3rd decimate of Libra, and as well aspected as sometimes an indication of material abundance and increase of possessions. Well, obviously being a royal, he's going to have a material abundance. So that's, but that's part of Ketu in Libra. But money does not always bring happiness, and the native will realize this. Definitely an aspect of Charles, I believe. Rahu in Aries gives self-assertion and a progressive nature. They should develop independence and stand on their own convictions. Personality should be brought to full development. Before you can give yourself away, you have to have a self to give. So this is about where he's moving to later in life, as he has now become king. Particularly, it's about him forming his own identity as a king, rather than the kind of voices that he was, of all the things that he was told to be by all the people that were grooming him to be the next king. It's about him finding out who he is and finding the personality and his own way of his own, bringing his own essence to the job. Ketu in Libra shows there's been too much emphasis on leaning on others and letting them run the life. Now this person must make his own decisions, whether they are right or wrong. Growth comes through one's own expression and experiences. So to a large degree, he's been in the shadow of Queen Elizabeth for a long time. And I know the relationship was also very good, but to some extent, when she passed on, it meant that he he's always had that relationship with her, and when she passed on, he's no longer got her there. We could say that she is in the spirit realm to some extent, but he's got to form his own personality and find out his own way of leading, like I say. Here the soul is learning the lessons of self-consciousness on the most elemental levels. Experiences in prior incarnations did not permit the self to form as a singular identity. Now the individual is paying the price for the indecisiveness of his former lives, as well as learning how to rise out of his confusion by developing one-mindedness. So that's going from Libra, the indecisiveness, into the Aries, which is the one-mindedness, leaping into things. Highly susceptible to flattery. He goes far out of his way to do the things he believes will please others. But because he has not yet himself gone through ego identification, he becomes confused as to what course of action to take, because he wants to please everybody. This is the aspect of the Libra. Always trying to balance those around him. That's the scales of the Libra. Trying to keep everything in balance, trying to stand. That's why they're seen as diplomats, because they see all sides of the story and all points of view, and it's trying to weigh up. And that's what makes them quite objective and detached in a sense, is because they're able to see all points of view, and they don't want to invest in anyone in particular. Always trying to balance those around him, he finds himself to be the eternal referee between two or more opposing ideas, people, or conditions. Standing in the middle, he assumes the role of the buffer, trying desperately to bring harmony to both sides at the same time. From moment to moment and day to day, he seesaws from one side to the other, hoping that he will never be required to take a definite stand. In prior lives, he judged his happiness by the successes or failures of those close to him. Now he continues to identify his life through others. His confidence can easily be shattered, for he hardly yet knows who he is. By confusing the collective needs of others with his own unrealized desires, he makes himself susceptible to long states of depression. Still, no matter how drained he feels, he continues this past life pattern of seeking out people with whom he can identify. At times, he develops resentment at his inability to pull the opposite parts within himself together. Yet he is so used to entertaining solutions to contrary ideas that he keeps creating more. He is attracted to music and the arts, feeling comfortable in an environment that is gracefully delicate. When circumstances around him become coarse or brittle, he loses control. And that's Librans ruled by the planet Venus, so they like beauty, so they don't like coarseness, they like charm, they like beauty. When things get coarse, they don't like conflict and discomfort in a sense. He doesn't like to live alone, but desires to be left alone. Hence why he probably has a lot of peace and solitude walking in the gardens. For his own peace and tranquility, he must learn to overcome his enormous sensitivity to all the disharmonious needs of those around him. He does this best by dropping the attitude that he must fight for his very survival and refocusing his attention on what positive thoughts help him to develop his own identity. So yeah, that's the Rahu in Aries, developing his own identity. In past incarnations, there was great sacrifice to others, which was not fully appreciated. That's the Libran aspect. self-sacrifice. Now the soul reincarnates with traces of resentment at not reaping the rewards of its efforts. This brings out the contrariness of the Libra Ketu and actually prevents the individual from finding his actual real self. The Rahu can come out only when the Ketu is brought to the highest possible karmic level. Thus, this individual will achieve his greatest potential after he learns to serve willingly without desiring any rewards beyond his own self-growth. So that's finding that balance between serving others and serving yourself. So it's where he, instead of giving himself away to others, it's a matter of keeping a sense of self while giving to others, and it's finding that balance there, and that's the crucial aspect of this alignment between Rahu and Ketu. The service aspect, and the other thing about this is Moon also is in Aries, and so that is the planet of emotions. It's also the planet of his mother, and I believe that Queen Elizabeth was an Aries sun in Vedic astrology, from what I remember. So I might be wrong with that. I have to look that one up. But anyway, Aries, the moon often represents the mother, but it's the moon is, his moon is in Aries in the Vedic signs, and it's in the house of acquisitions and kind of traditions, and the house of Capricorn, so the house of restriction also, and finances too. So yeah, it's like when he gets sick of trying to please everybody and gets to the point where he's exhausted with not having an identity and feeling exhausted from overgiving all the time and trying to please people, and not being indecisive and not really knowing, listening to everybody's point of view because he's been told by everybody that you should do this, you should do that, you should do this. He then gets to the point where he's pissed off, and that's when he gets into the Aries. There's also the moon sign coming in, so his emotions, Aries can be quite impatient, and so that is an aspect of Aries that he might display as an impatience from time to time. And I think you do sort of see that. You saw that little incident with the fountain pen where he got pissed off with the fact that it was just not working, dripping ink all over the place, and it was impractical, and so he got pissed off with it and got a bit impatient with it. You also see that with sometimes with his children. I think, in a sense, there can be a little bit of impatience there. He might be impatient in terms of with restrictions, like there might be, with this Aries in the house of sort of restriction, when he might get, that's one of the things that I can feel like he gets impatient with the restrictions that are imposed upon him, hence he desires that change of the 5. He gets impatient with, I don't think, even though he's born into money, I don't think he's about money. I think he he's found out that money doesn't really bring you happiness, and that he sort of, there's an element of resentment that he's had to grow into this position. And so the Aries sort of shows in that house that there's an element where he might be a bit flippant and impatient with money, where he might even suddenly spend a whole lot impulsively, because Aries are quite impulsive, so he might have some impulsive spending habits. I don't know if that's an aspect of him, but when he's when he gets emotional, it might be to the point where he holds back and weighs everything up in the Libra aspect, and then when he gets emotional and angry, then he goes into the Aries aspect and might go on a big spending spree and spend a whole lot of money. There was quite a lot spent on the coronation, I have to say. Not that that's anything to do with it. He did wait 75 years or something for that moment, so it's fair enough, I guess. He was impressionable in other lifetimes. Now he spends at least the first half of his life coping with the leftover residue of his own gullibility. As the years pass, he becomes an avid reader, which helps him to crystallize his thoughts. Still, there are so many past life habits of indecisiveness that he finds it extremely difficult to make concrete decisions. Not something fit for a king. However, moving into the Rahu, hopefully in early life, he's overcome those aspects of himself, and later in life, he's moving into the decisiveness of the Aries. So always liking to see both sides of everything, the Libra scales. He divides himself in half at every crossroad, trying to please everybody. When these divisions become so painful that he can no longer bear his own indecision, he then starts to reach for his Aries Rahu. Ultimately, he learns not to be afraid of taking a stand for what his higher self senses as truth. He reaches this by teaching himself to be an individual rather than an extension of somebody else. Still, he must build on his prior incarnations, which taught him how to love rather than hate. Thus, as he starts to find himself, he must still be mindful of how his newly discovered assertive influences those close to him. His newly discovered assertiveness influences those close to him, meaning that, it's about finding that balance. So bringing that past life aspect in, and keeping the good aspects of that, overcoming the bad aspects or the shadow sides of it, but keeping the good aspects and finding that balance between bringing the learnings from the Aries Rahu in. For short periods of time, he will have to isolate himself in order to gather his strength. Hence, it's something we also see in the number 6 as well. The need to have solitude and regather. His biggest lessons center around learning how to. It's almost an aspect of finding yourself when you've had so many voices speaking to you all the time. It's almost like you need to get away from that and have some solitude to find out what your voice is, and that's what he needs. And I think perhaps walking in the garden is something that he helps him to do that, talking to the plants as such. For short periods of time, he will isolate himself in order to gather his strength. His biggest lessons center around learning how to make his head rule his heart, for still he melts too easily at the slightest attention. Of all the zodiac, this individual has the least amount of past life experience in examining himself. Now he must find out who he really is. In the current life, he is destined to make the transition from the reaper to the sower, whereupon every thought becomes a creative seed for his new beginning. The house which contains the Ketu, which is the house of Capricorn, the house of finances, the house of restriction, the house of tradition, shows the area in life where too much past identification with others inhibited self-development. The house which contains the Rahu, the house which contains the Ketu, wrong, was the house of Cancer, so the house of the family. So that shows where the area in life where too much past identification with others inhibited his self-development. So the family, and that makes a lot of sense there. Whereas the house which contains the Rahu designates the area where the self is experiencing its birth, which is the house of Capricorn. Once a new sense of, so that's to do with tradition. So maybe actually he might find solace in the tradition of the church. We saw a lot of he titled himself as the keeper of the faith. And I think that's a title that they give to the king. So I think obviously he has places quite a bit of importance on the church, I believe. Once a new sense of self-identity is achieved, this individual will feel like Columbus discovering America. And the most amazing part of this discovery is reaching the awareness that it was there all along, but he never knew it. So that's the element of the 11 that we talked about with the numerology, that he has this magnetism and this leadership, but and it was there all along, but it's a kind of a slow plodding approach to actually realize its potential there. And in fact, other people might have noticed it, but he was perhaps unaware of it himself. Previous incarnation for this person was very easygoing and in considerable luxurious surroundings, and you see that growing up as well in his early life. Obviously he had a lot of luxury growing up. Good things in life were the main pursuits for the soul. Learning on a mental level was very important for him. In this lifetime, he has to work with actions and aggression. Things are not always balanced for him now. As a result of this, he has to utilize all the means he can within his energies to carry through his wishes. Impatience and lack of tolerance can cause frustrations for him in this life. We see that with his family sometimes. Just you see that every now and again. In his coming out in his personality. His job is tough, as he has to keep his feet on the ground and at the same time watch for what goes on well above him. So that's failure to keep both ends tied up may cause loss of many successful opportunities in this lifetime. So he has to keep that connection to the divine, in a sense. That's important for him to keep his feet on the ground. It's that symbolism of the cross, actually bringing the heaven to the earth plane. You need to learn to do things. So he needs to learn to do things for himself. his Ketu may respond, the Libra Ketu may respond, yeah, but it's much easier to let others do things for me. Every time I try to do my own thing, either somebody takes advantage of me or I wind up getting somebody mad at me. So they don't want conflict and they don't want to rock the boat. So this is the learning that he has to go through. I identify with a lot of this myself because I've got a bit of Libra in my chart. I've got a Libra Sun and a Libra Venus. Your major problem is that you're not rational when it comes to relationships. So, possible reasons. Now, this is very interesting. He could have had such a hang-up. So this is, what I'm reading here is general for anyone who has Rahu in Aries and Ketu and Libra. But it just seems so appropriate to King Charles in this sense. Possible reasons. He has such a hang-up about being fair to everybody that he bent over backwards for others at the expense of his own individuality. He stifled his leadership abilities because using them led to friction or discord. He was unable to get started on things without help due to the lack of ambition of self-motivation. So that's the thing about the Libra, is they can often wait for things to happen to them and be a sort of sort of passive participant, rather than the Aries, which is very active and taking control of things, which some people don't like the Aries because of that. They can tend to be control freaks at times. That can be the shadow side of the Aries, is over controlling. Another reason is that he was unable to get started on, we went through that. Life experiences have overemphasized the value of leaning on others and encouraged passivity as a means of gaining acceptance. Solutions: force yourself to undertake leadership roles, dare to be enthusiastic about his beliefs and interests, cultivate spontaneity, do things on his own once in a while, find a guru to follow, find a big strong man or good woman to lean on. So interesting that in terms of his relationship with both Diana, who has a very strong personality, and Camilla, who I think is showing herself to be quite a strong personality too. With Libra Ketu, decision-making is often a problem. This is because with Libra Ketu, there's a tendency to overdevelop logic to the point of that it smothers the Aries feeling and acting functions. However, feelings can't be totally ignored. They have a way of coming out and moving you in certain directions, whether you choose to be aware of them or not. If Charles is denied positive expression through individuality and assertiveness, he'll be forced to take a negative route through insincerity, meddling, or dependence. With Libra Ketu, rationalization can lead to irrationality, since feelings get lost in the shuffle. Using the dependency on passive intellectualizing is the result of some traumatic experience where feelings have let the individual down. Often he or she has been ridiculed or rejected for reasons that were never clearly understood, and from that point on has decided that feelings can't be trusted. So figuring out strategies replaces feelings. The Libra Ketu takes great pains to be sure that all decisions about marriage, job, and lifestyle in general are formulated logically and planned thoroughly. The trouble is that logic without feeling leads to marriage without love, prestige without satisfaction, and existence without living. So we saw that in his early life, where logic without feeling leads to marriage without love. That was his marriage to Diana. But now he's moving into the Aries aspect in the Rahu, where he's found the woman that he loves, and is moving out of that. So prestige without satisfaction. I think he felt a lot of that growing up too, as with all the pressures of royalty on him, but feeling a sort of just wanting to be one of the boys probably, and feeling a kind of sense of dissatisfaction at having this heavy weight on his shoulders that he had to bear. Existence without living. One of the things that I thought of when I read this is with Diana. There was an interview once with him where he sort of said, someone asked him, well, are you in love? And he said, he sort of philosophizes it away and says, well, what is love really? So it becomes this philosophical version of love, this Platonic version of love, this kind of love, bigger love, which is sort of duty and friendship and that kind of love, but not romantic, passionate love, which is love of Aries, although Librans are very romantic as well, but it's a love that lacks passion. It's an intellectualized love, and that he had for Diana a sense of duty, and that he was, that it was the right kind of marriage, that it was right for him because it pleased everybody, it pleased his parents, everyone was satisfied, their marriage looked good to other people, but it wasn't really real. But if you asked him whether he feels love for Camilla, I think he'd respond quite differently. And in fact, you saw him in certain interviews, or perhaps again in the representation from the Netflix series The Crown, where he talks about Camilla in a very different way, that she's the one, that there's a passion there and feeling there. Eventually depression sets in and logic ceases to function. At that point, Libra Ketu is forced to get in touch with his or her feelings and take appropriate action, thus attaining a nodal balance between Aries and Libra. In my experience, the person with an overdeveloped Libra Ketu dislikes being alone, asks for help and advice, but then seems resentful of it. Yeah. Spends a great deal of time and money on grooming, cosmetics, clothing, speaks in a monotone or a very tiny voice. Does that sound like Charles speaking in a monotone? He does have a sort of monotonous voice at times. Is indecisive, is extremely cooperative to the point of being a doormat, has an inferiority complex. I definitely think that was a part of him growing up, feeling that he didn't feel like he was right for the job, or that he didn't feel like he could live up to the expectations of the job or the people. Is a gracious host or hostess whose door is invariably open to everyone at all times. Apparently, Katy Perry got housed in the Windsor Castle. I was listening to an interview with Willie Appiata, I think, where he was saying when he went to stay with Charles, they were very gracious hosts and very welcoming in their home. And so it's not a bad aspect, it's a good aspect, but doors open at all times. That's the Libra is they have their heart so open that they let everything in, and sometimes once they've let everything in, it becomes so overwhelming, and that's where he goes into the Aries, where he has to sort of become a bit more driven and a bit more direct. And here we go. Works hard at romance and feels sorry for single people regardless of their circumstances. Rahu in Aries wants to be outgoing. He or she wants to be a self-started, well able to lead and assertive enough to get what he or she wants. In contrast, this person is generally well liked but inclined to see himself or herself as passive or too shy. There's usually an interest in or talent for the art, fashion, editing, publicizing, or some other liberal talent. But because the person seldom challenges the talent by doing anything innovative, he or she is passed by when a claim gets handed out, and may begin to feel resentful. So we see a strong interest in the arts with Charles. He can be sympathetic to the point of becoming a doormat, and may become so enmeshed in others' struggles for success and happiness that his own needs remain unfulfilled. That's a sad aspect in a sense. But yeah, it's about needing to find his own identity and be a bit selfish from time to time, instead of feeling like he has to please everybody all the time. Antidotes: psychological counseling, particularly assertiveness training, is often helpful to utilize the Aries Rahu. The client must be advised to write or tape a statement of his or her philosophy of life, including a list of goals for the next year. I think Charles did actually have some counseling at some point from memory. You may then say fulfilling goals. Scientific study, particularly in the field of physics or physical development, may be recommended if the client has an aptitude along those lines. Any sort of discipline program, from scouting to the National Guards, could prove beneficial. I think Charles spent some time in the Army or the RAF, the Royal Air Force, so maybe even the Scouts. So that's good for him, and I think he did. It sort of showed him coming a bit into his own when that happened in the Crown. Leadership roles, particularly in the work sphere, should be accepted. For any type of Aries imbalance, the catchphrase should be "try something new." This something new should naturally coincide with some untapped talent as shown in the chart. For many reasons, clients may not be ready to embark on a totally new lifestyle. In this case, as a new hobby could be beneficial. Among the hobbies, hunting, nature activities. Does that sound like Charles? Yes, I believe it does. Hunting and nature activities. Photography of wildlife. Football or soccer, hockey, boxing, karate, and enamel work. So yeah, those are very things that Charles engages in. He may need to be more independent and not be reliant on relationships or others' perceptions. He should avoid shaping his identity by assuming others' attitudes, beliefs, and values. So about finding himself. Lacking self-confidence can result in confusion and indecision, especially when important decisions are required. At times it may appear that he allows others to decide for him. So he has to come into his own and make his own decisions. Very important as a king. Relationships can provide security and stability, and you try to please those on whom you depend. Yet through lacking self-knowledge, he may fail to acknowledge and respect his own needs, desires, and aims. Be wary of more dominant influences. Diana, she has the one energy, for example. He may be gullible and impressionable. I think there was a sense where she did have him a little bit wrapped around her finger, in a sense. I mean, there's the opposite as well, where we saw that Diana's natural flair got a bit stifled in the relationship as well. So, but there was an element of toxicity in that relationship, I think. If so, he needs to outgrow this gullibility and impressionability and assume responsibility for evaluating situations and options. Relying on others will interfere with his choices and major decisions. At times of crisis, a divided self only adds extra confusion and pain. He needs to be decisive to resolve issues. Try to follow inner promptings, perhaps previously ignored or dismissed messages. Move in the direction towards which intuition guides him. Through developing faith in the process, he can release potential and be true to his nature. In so doing, you can discover how to honor your whole self. So instead of relying on everybody else for decisions, he needs to find his own connection to that faith. That's part of the aspect of the Libra, is an overexpansive ego where they want to please everybody, so they don't know themselves. And it gets to the point where they're so indecisive that they don't know what to do because they can see all sides of the story. So that's when they have to go to their higher self and surrender all of that bullshit and kind of just make a decision from that place. When overly sensitive to others' needs or tending to confuse them with your unrealized and unfulfilled desires, he may experience weakened vital energies which can create occasional depression. And I think we did see a bit of that in Charles growing up. Acknowledge and assert your requirements and take responsibility to satisfy them, as these are important for integration and personal growth. While the concept of service to others may remain a motivating force, his first priority must be to himself, so that he integrates his whole being instead of diminishing himself through relationship dependency. Once this is achieved, he could serve from a different yet more effective perspective. So it's about, again, finding the balance. So getting away from serving others all the time to being a bit selfish. It's something that he could learn to be a bit more of in order to develop a personality and a kind of direction, in a sense. And then with that, he can use both elements of and find a balance between them, between service to self and service to others. It kind of, serving others through serving himself, or serving the self through serving others, in a sense as well, but also a balance between the inner and the outer, and between his desires and how they interact with others, how he can not total selfishness, which is Aries in its shadow side, and not total selflessness, a kind of balance. Once this is achieved, he could serve from a different When he attains inner harmony, energies radiating from him will embody this quality to benefit him, even though he might find some of these energies uncomfortable due to their disharmonious state. His new assertiveness also needs to respect relationships connecting self and others for mutual benefit and balance. The Libra. He needs to be true to himself to discover how to cooperate with others. The paradox of life. By acknowledging his nature, he can explore relationships in greater depth, enriching them through shared understanding. Often the Libran energy is activated when he tries to unify people, ideas, and situations, operating like a central balance between opposite conditions. That's the scales there. The holistic nature of the Libra, the idealistic nature of the Libra, wanting to be all things to all people. The new balance required from him is self and others, where he develops balanced attitudes, individuality and independence, while creating interdependent relationships. The key to this is to transform dependent behavior patterns. Aries is the cardinal fire sign. This is the sign par excellence, in which self-manifestation takes place. Here, the I must stand out against the world, and especially against the you, because Aries is the first house, the number one, the leader, the way shower, the path maker, the driving force, the ram, moving ahead, bullish. That's Taurus, but the ram with its horns, moving ahead, paving the way. Yes to ourselves, we must say. So yes, so there's an element of loneliness, like I said, in the one. Aries is always the first house, the house of the personality, is the first house. So here the I must stand out against the world, and especially against the you. So you have to be unpopular for an extent to be a leader, to pave new paths, because you're going against the grain of tradition. We must be able to say yes to ourselves and to express this attitude in our lifestyle. Nevertheless, the way in which the desire for self-assertion is expressed by the Aries native will depend on their state of awareness. Or to put it another way, the hazier the picture we have of ourselves, the more we resort to force. But the more differentiated our consciousness is, the more subtly we proceed. So that's the Aries and Libra. So differentiated, meaning everyone to all people, therefore we tiptoe around everybody, whereas and if we're a bit hazier in our picture of ourselves, we tend to try and force our way too much. Yet even when being fairly subtle, we still use push. We have plenty of that. The I tends to manifest itself in what may be pictured as a series of pulsations. The same is true when the moon's node is in Aries. And incidentally, that's the moon's node is the Rahu, but his moon is also in Aries too. Governing the emotions. We try to bring our personality to bear on the world in order to make things happen. This placement of the node is usually a fairly strong incentive to be creative. We see that a lot in charts. Someone with the node in Aries is incapable of settling down to routine work, even when output would increase. Increased output is not a consideration with Aries. What matters is creating something unlike anything anyone else can create. To produce something creative that is completely personal is the ultimate self-expression for the sign. With hard aspects, no, there is a danger of overproducing, like some sort of hard-nosed. The native engages in hectic activity and revels in quantity instead of being creative. However, the individual with the node in Aries can produce an enormous amount of truly creative work. We see Charles painting, we see him playing cello and piano, we see him involved in the arts. We see him with a wide variety of interests in healing and the arts. So that's the Libra aspects, and we've touched also there on the Aries moon, where he is, there'll be a sense of impatience in realms of money and restriction and tradition and anger and impulsiveness that might come through his Aries of moon. And that's, to me, also the essence of the 5 in numerology, that he has wanting desire for freedom. But there's also a drive in those areas, or a drive in terms of finances, and because Aries is a very driving sign as well, so it's not necessarily a bad thing in those areas, but it's a sort of element of selfishness in those areas, or kind of an ego or a controlling aspect in those areas, where maybe he becomes a bit controlling in areas of the finances when he's when he gets angry, and you can see that, I think, sometimes where he is, if I remember rightly, various members of the royal family have been engaged in nefarious activities or have displeased him, have been cut off from their royal stipends or whatever. So there is an impulsiveness and an impatience there when he gets angry with and impatient with people. It's a margin energy. So I want to also look at the other aspects of his chart quite briefly, because we're going up to 2 hours now. So we've looked at the Sun in Libra, Mercury in Libra, communication, charming, indecisive, in the house of the family, the 4th house in this sense. Moon in Aries. Now, we've looked at the Rahu in Aries and the Ketu in Libra. So air and fire, that's what we're seeing there. Now, his Ascendant, which is how he appears to other people, if you like, his personality in a sense, how he comes across to other people, how he presents his outer face. So the Sun being his inner face, Libra, the Aries, so that Ascendant being his outer face, Cancer. So his outer face is that he presents to people as a very caring, nurturing, almost like a mother figure, a healer, a family man. That's the face that he presents to the outside world. There's probably specific traits also that are associated with Cancer, which you might notice in his physical appearance. One thing I did really notice looking at him over the coronation was his eyes seem to be very caring eyes, almost like he's got both in a good way, but in a way that could affect him as well. So to the point where he cares, he's got a lot of compassion for people, and heartfelt desire to help people and to nurture people, to heal. That's the Cancerian element. But he's also to the point where it's that six element again, where he potentially cares too much, in the sense that he's trying to, he cares that things and worries about people, but about things going according to plan, which is the Libran aspect as well, the Libra Sun too. That he looks sometimes it sort of switches between a kind of overcare or worry even, or anxiety, into a kind of care when he's relaxed, into a kind of very care, nurturing, compassionate, loving kind of presence that you see there in his eyes. Yeah, so that's the ascendant sign. Venus in Virgo, so his Venus is in the 3rd house, which would be the house of communication and social networks. So that means that he's likely to meet his marriage partner through social networks, and I think that's exactly what happened, because Venus is the sign of love. It's also the sign of career, so that's where he's likely to find advancement. But his Venus is in Virgo, which is actually ruled by Mercury, and the 3rd house is also in Gemini, which is ruled. The 3rd house is the house of Gemini, which is ruled by Mercury as well. So Venus, though, in the 3rd house in Virgo means that in career and in marriage, he tends to be someone who's of service. Virgo is like the service profession, so doctors, teachers, the caring, that sort of the professions of service. Health is important to Virgos. They also tend to be very detail orientated, so that might be something. They have a very obsessive attention to detail, so that might be something that operates in his love relationship, but also in his career. He might be very detail orientated in how he approaches things in his work life, but also in his love life. And one of the aspects of the Virgo is they can be both very self-critical as well as very critical of others. So you might see in that sense in his relationships, in life, that he could be very pick up on very small details, and those very small details could be blown into bigger things. Like he's very hypersensitive to the point where he picks up on every little thing. That could be a Virgoan element, and I think there was elements of that with Diana that we saw, where he has huge attention to detail, where you feel almost like you're under the microscope, perhaps in a relationship with a Virgo and Venus. There's sort of can be a bit obsessive almost, and very kind of they obsess about things like cleanliness, for example, might be a Virgoan trait. They're also very hardworking and practical, so that's how he's likely to come across in relationship, is to be quite practical but serving of the other person, quite communicative in love and in career, because Virgo is ruled by Mercury. Virgos are often quite talkative, and Virgos also love animals, so that's where he might find so some of his work might be associated with animals and loving animals. And I notice, I've heard that he sometimes lets squirrels into the palace and gives them names and things like that. And obviously there's the corgis that the Queen had. I don't know if he still has those or what happened to those, but so he is likely in his work to have a connection to animals and potentially nature as well. It's a Virgoan aspect. Also in the house of communication and social networks, so maybe something like dog walking, maybe hunting. I think Virgo is named after the Virgin Artemis, the huntress goddess, possibly, or there's some connection to Artemis. So the hunt, social networks involving animals, but he might also have, ones that aren't violent, like that as well. A kind of love for animals too, which might mean, I don't know, maybe he's taken a kind of, I don't know, does he do hunting? Not really sure. It might be the opposite, that he rebels against the notion of hunting because he finds it abhorrent, because he loves animals. That could be an aspect of Virgo in his career. But yeah, or social networks with animals, or community and serving professions, health, also communication about health and well-being, particularly physical health. So there's his Venus in Virgo. Then we move on to Mars in Scorpio. Now, Mars is to do with your movement through the world and the way that you move through the world, the way that you take action, how you take your place in the world, your purpose, in a sense. It's your driving force, and his Mars is in Scorpio, meaning that Mars is naturally at home in Scorpio, because Scorpio is ruled by Mars, so that's quite a potent planet in his chart, and Scorpio means that Scorpio is also quite strong in his chart. It's exalted there. I've heard from Mars and Scorpio people that I know, that Mars and Scorpio can have quite a temper. The Scorpio's got the sting in the tail, so when they're crossed, they can get a bit vengeful. That's an element of Scorpio that you might see in the way that he operates. I think we've seen that a bit with how he's treated people that have crossed him within his family, the Harry and Andrew, for example. So it's also a very transformational sign, so it means that there's likely to be an aspect of transformation being going through a kind of snake shedding its skin, or a butterfly emerging from the chrysalis kind of thing throughout. Scorpio can also be quite self-destructive at times. If that energy is turned inwards. They're also very creative with the water sign, being a water sign, very determined. So with that Mars and Scorpio, there's a sense of determination. And the Mars is in the 5th house, which would be the house of Leo. So the house of of the sun, which is sort of determination to shine his light, determination to. It's also the house of drama. So there might be times when he could be a little bit of a drama queen as such. But he might also be interested in drama as in theatre. And he might, I think we've seen him acting, I saw him acting some Shakespeare, doing a Hamlet speech actually. So and when he was young, he was involved in theatre. So he might find a sense of drive through theatre and plays and the like. Because Leo rules that drama. Jupiter in Sagittarius, so that would be in the house of Virgo too. So Jupiter in Sagittarius means Jupiter's where you find your luck or expansion, which would be through Sagittarius, which is through culture and travel and philosophy. And I think in some of his tours with early on, he does travel a lot. He's very well traveled, and I think he enjoys travel. And I think he gets, I think when he did go traveling, like he was sent away from home for schooling. He was sent to Australia and New Zealand on a tour with Diana. I think that was a very well received tour. And so he gets a sense of expansion and luck through traveling. So traveling is very good for him. Also in mingling with other cultures and interest in language and culture. So traveling perhaps to exotic places even. There was a lot of different cultural things on display in his coronation concert, for example, and his coronation. A lot of different cultures on show. And that is in the house. So here we go. In the house of Virgo, which would be probably the house of service. So he that part of his service is travelling, because he has to go around the Commonwealth and meet with the various constituents and people in the Commonwealth. So part of his service is travelling through his as a service to the world in a way, through his work, through his finally, we're going to look at Saturn. So we're nearly there. Saturn in Leo. Now, Saturn in Leo would be in the Saturn in Leo. So just I can look at it here. I don't need to go through all that. Leo, Saturn, 1, 2, second house. There we go. His ascendant's in Cancer. His Saturn is in Leo, which means it's in the second house, which is the house of material possessions and beauty, beautifying things, like interior design, things like that. Anyway, so Saturn in Leo, which means Saturn is to do with the restrictive elements in your conditioning. So in Leo possibly means that he had a restricted sun, restricted, so he wasn't fully able to be himself as a child because of all the weight of possibility of the crown weighing heavy upon his shoulders, and his parents' expectations of him, the public expectation of him, the huge expectation on his shoulders. So Saturn meant in Leo meant that he wasn't fully able to shine, and so it's also a restriction in a sense on his energy, in a sense, because it would have weighed him down, and so he might have felt quite tired as a result of all the burden of this pressure of having this crown on his head and knowing that he was always going to be the future king. So he had to hide his light to some degree, and his full sun hasn't been able to bloom, and that's what he goes through in early childhood, is the conditioning. That's the Saturn conditioning that we go through through our life, our early childhood, and through our upbringing, is that, and that's also Saturn. Leo rules drama, so he might not have fully got to experience that desire that he has for acting, perhaps. And I think I remember seeing an episode in The Crown where he loved acting. He got the lead role in a play, and he loved acting, but he couldn't pursue it. And maybe we've got Scorpio in that house of Leo as well, where he has a drive for acting. We see him acting in the Shakespeare as well, doing lines, and I think perhaps there might have been a desire to act or do drama or be involved in the theatre that he might have had to have suppressed because of the nature of his upbringing and because of the nature of the crown, which is sad in a way. Saturn in Leo in the house of material possessions too. So restrictions in that sense. I don't think Charles was, he obviously grew up with wealth, but I don't think he was particularly spoiled as a kid. I think they wanted him to you know, to mingle with, I think he went to a private school and a public school, so he went to Eton later on, but I think early on he was sent away to a school where he had to sort of just, you know, it was, I don't really know, I might be wrong there, but yeah. Anyway, restriction through drama in the realm of possessions. So maybe he wasn't just given what he wanted when he was a kid. Maybe he was told what to do, in a sense, and wasn't just spoiled, and you know, he didn't get what he wanted because they wanted to give him an upbringing where he didn't have those advantages. Obviously, he grew up with a lot of wealth around him, but yeah, he would have to have. There's that notion that's referred to in the Rahu and Ketu, where he grew up with material wealth, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it made him happy. So maybe there's an aspect that where, because of the wealth that he grew up with and that financial security and the lavish surroundings and everything that he was brought up with, that also almost acted as a restriction in some sense in the weight of his kingship, that kind of acted as a restriction somewhat on his you know, being able to fully be the sun, which is your soul urge in a way, to fully be his full expression, which is the sun, the Leo aspect. Anyway, that brings to a close pretty much the Vedic and numerology of King Charles. I hope you've enjoyed listening along. It's 2:22 and 22 seconds, which is quite interesting. Yeah, I'm not going to delve into other aspects of royalty. I just wanted to do something. The thing about astrology and numerology is that everybody is equal, and we've all got downsides and upsides, and we're all multidimensional, and there's a lot of different aspects to us, and some people might only concentrate on the negative or might only concentrate on the positive, but we've got challenges and you know, talents, challenges we have to overcome, weaknesses, shadow sides. We've got things that we bring, positive elements. We're all pieces of a bigger puzzle. And so we're all very multidimensional. If that's one thing I hope you see from this reading, is that our personalities are made up of a lot of different aspects. So Charles there has got air, fire, earth, water in his chart. He's got less of the earth, so he's less practical. He's got quite a bit of air, intellectual. He's got a bit of fire, so passionate, and he's got a bit of water as well, so emotional. So he's quite well-rounded and quite balanced, less practical, but yeah, which is the Earth sign. But he's got his Venus in Virgo. So yeah, there's the aspects of King Charles, and you can see, I think, how the numerology and the Vedic astrology interact with each other, and how the elements of the 6 and the 5 and the 1 and the 6, the 5 and the 1 that we mentioned, particularly in his in the 11 was the other thing, come out also in the astrology and how they overlap. So it's yeah, it's I always find it interesting how just how many how right when I think of Charles, if I look at that astrology chart, I think, gosh, that really does sound like him. And to some extent, that's one of the things that you can get through astrology is just sort of a confirmation that you are who you think you are. That's what I've found when I had my Vedic astrology chart. Yes, I am who I think I am, who I believe myself to be. And incidentally, I'm not who other people tell me what I am. Yeah, so yeah, that was one thing. It confirmed for me that I am who I believe myself to be. I found that when I got my palm read as well, incidentally too. And so, yeah, that's why I call my work quantum astrology in a sense, because I also do things called mind, dream spell, and human design. And I find that with Vedic astrology, human design, mind, dream spell, numerology, they all cross over. They're just sort of different branches of the same tree, and different ways of looking at things, but they just can't come up with very similar aspects. So yeah, the numerology echoes the astrology and vice versa. Thank you for sharing this time with me. If you've got this far, if I haven't bored you to tears, if you'd like to delve into your astrology and numerology, please contact me through Jivana Quantum Healing on Facebook or Instagram, or through my website, and I can do readings for you. Also do tarot, among other things. I'm trying to be quiet because I'm a bit worried that people can hear me upstairs, and they're sleeping. It's been a long night. This is the 3rd time that I've attempted this video. But thank you very much for bearing with me, and appreciate you being here. Please like, share, and subscribe. I'm trying to get more subscribers to this channel. I intend to do more of these videos. So please like, share, and subscribe. You can probably see my overexpansive Libra aspect coming out, and the video is almost gone to 2.5 hours now. So I should probably bring it to a close, but that's one of the aspects of the Libra, as I say, is the holistic nature. Peter Jackson is a Libra in Vedic astrology, hence his Lord of the Rings movies. Lord of the Rings movies were very epic and sprawling in nature, because he wanted to include everything. 229, well, 29, Charles's number, 11. Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you for sharing this time with me.